Hello and welcome to today's video. So this time we're going to be having a look at the British Judge Dee paperbacks as written by crime novelist Robert van Gulik. So I've pretty much got them all now, and I'm very pleased to be able to show you these today. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Robert Hans van Gulik was actually an Orientalist, a diplomat, a musician and a writer, and certainly his best known work was the Judge Dee historical mysteries, the protagonist of which he borrowed from the 18th century Chinese detective novel Di Gung An. So during World War II, Van Gulik translated that 18th century novel into English and released it under the title of The Celebrated Cases of Judge Dee. And the main character of this book, Judge Dee, was based on the real statesman and detective Di Zheng-a. He lived in the 7th century during the Tang dynasty, though in the novel itself elements of the Ming dynasty were mixed in. Thanks to his translation of this largely forgotten work, Van Gulik became interested in Chinese detective fiction, and to the translation he appended an essay of the genre in which he suggested that it would be quite easy to imagine rewriting some of the old Chinese case histories with an eye towards modern readers. So not long after that he tried himself his hand at creating a detective story along those lines. And this book became, well, this book, The Chinese Maze Murders. This was completed around 1950. Van Gulik got it first published in Japanese, first of all, and it was sold in Japan. He then got it translated into Chinese and was published by Singapore Book Publishing Company in 1953. The reviews are actually excellent on it. So Van Gulik wrote a couple more books in the series. These were once again published in Japanese and Chinese, and then finally he found a publisher who would do British language editions, so English versions, and from 1957 onwards they were published in the English language. So what we've got here today is the series in order in the British first editions in paperback. So most of these in hardback were published by Michael Joseph. I don't collect those, but I do collect these rather nice paperback editions, and the publication of these was shared amongst Panther, who did it under their brilliant, well, the early ones at least, under their Crime Band logo, which are these ones here, and also by Penguin Books, which, as you know, I absolutely love Penguin. So this was the first one. So these are not in strictly published order, although they're very similar, but this is in the order that you should read them. So apart from the original book, The Celebrated Cases of Judge Dee, which he was merely a translator for, this is the next one in the series. So this Panther edition was 1962 for the Chinese Maze Murders, and I don't have many Panther Crime Band books in my collection, but they are very distinctive with this. This is the band in question. Really nice cover on this one, actually. Often the illustrations, Van Gulik himself actually did them. So he actually drew quite a lot of these illustrations, which does also add quite a nice touch to them. A bit like a Delmat back, you get a scene of where the action is going to be taking place. And I suppose one of the ways you could perhaps think of a Judge Dee book is, I don't know, he's like a, he's got the sort of, yeah, well, on the back here, they sort of, you know, liken him a bit to Sherlock Holmes. I would perhaps more liken him maybe to more like a Poirot, but, you know, that's just me. Now, the next book in the series was The Chinese Bell Murders. Now, this one, once again, was a nice Panther crime band, one of the largest in the series. So it's consequently 5 shillings. Similar art style again to the first one, released as this crime band. Panther edition was 1966. As I said, this is the order to read them, not the order that they were first published, but these are all, to the best of my knowledge, UK paperback firsts of each book in the series. The next one was The Chinese Lake Murders. This is yet another Panther crime band title. And they really are nice, these Panther crime band books. If any of my viewers who are watching have actually got a checklist of all the books that were released under the Panther crime band sort of overall moniker, I would really like that, because I've looked hard online and I've not been able to find a list of all the titles that were released in this format, because I think they're great. The ones that I have found online, they're not necessarily expensive, but they do have some of them have fantastic photo covers which look great, and they're from crime authors you don't necessarily would consider first off. This one, February 66 for that, so that's the Chinese Lake Murders. Now, the next one is the Chinese Gold Murders, and this is the first one from Penguin Books. So this is obviously released under the Penguin, very familiar green crime style. I do love my 60s Penguin crime. Collected in its own right, of course. There are lots of people who just collect Penguin crime books. This one was 1962, first in a Penguin. Then the next one in the series to read is back to Panther again, which is the Chinese Nail Murders. Really nice distinctive cover on that one, for sure. Little tangram puzzle on the back there. 1966. You see these do make quite an interesting bit of spine art. So it was the Nail Murders. Next one we have is the Haunted Monastery. Now this was actually the first Judge Dee book that I read, because I picked it up as part of my Penguin collection years and years ago, quite a quick read. In fact, most of these now on are very swift reads. You can sort of zoom through them in a couple of sessions, but they do come recommended. And this is not perhaps my favourite cover with the photo on, but you'll notice that the Chinese sort of lantern effect is replicated later on. So it was the Haunted Monastery. The next one's another Penguin, but it's a little bit later on. And although it's a crime book, it's unusual in that it's a Penguin book without the traditional green crime. It's actually almost like a fiction book, more in the orange colours. But it does say crime and mystery in the corner. And this is the Red Pavilion. It's got a cover designed by David Pelham, I say, on the back. Quite a famous designer. And this is towards the end of the 60s, yeah, 1969. My sort of cut-off point for collecting Penguin was around the introduction of ISBN. So this is a Penguin series number of 2996. I generally don't collect much Penguin after the number 3000. That's sort of my cut-off point for those. The next one is another Penguin, which is the Lacquer Screen. And a couple of these Penguins I've actually had a bit of a job tracking down, and this was one of them. And I don't think that they sold as well as perhaps some of the earlier ones. So this is not the greatest of covers, or copies rather. This cover was designed by Richard Weaver, it says on the back, using a drawing by the author. So it looks like they've just sort of adapted that jacket ever so slightly. Yeah, this is quite a worn copy, but I have read all of these now, so it's not the end of the world. And this Penguin one was 1968 for the Lacquer Screen. The next one, we go back in time a little bit to the Emperor's Peril, and this is that same sort of motif with the Chinese lantern on again. A much better copy, this one, because I think it's just more easily found. Certainly I've had this one for a long time. Once again, they're liking Judge Dee to Sherlock Holmes, the Sherlock Holmes of the Tang dynasty. And I said I wouldn't, although he's very methodical, I'd liken him more to Hercule Poirot than Sherlock Holmes. 1966, let's start another little pile there, shall we? The next one, we're back to Panther. It's very interesting with this, that Panther themselves, for this cover, almost started mimicking the Penguin crime books of this period by having predominantly green colours. Monkey and the Tiger, and this is actually 2 short stories put into the one book. 3 and 6 was the price, and this Panther book was 1968. Sadly not as a crime band, but I honestly think that the crime bands were just a very short-lived experiment, and there weren't too many of those. The next one is The Willow pattern, back to Penguin again. Once again, I found this one quite difficult to track a copy down, even though it's sort of late 1960s, and I honestly don't know why. All I can think of is it perhaps just had the one printing, 1968, and it just didn't sell so well, you know, so a bit of a shame. Not the greatest of covers, but, you know, there we are. The next one is Murder in Canton. Now, this is quite interesting. This is a Panther. Now, the reason this one is interesting is because it actually has a picture of a TV adaptation. So, Judge D, a series of plays by Granada Television based on the stories by Robert van Gulik, with Michael Goodliffe as Judge D, adapted for television by John Wells, produced by Howard Baker. So, I have never seen this TV adaptation. I don't even know if it still exists. Let's hope it does. But around this time, so when was this? This was 1969, this particular edition. That was when this TV adaptation hit. And you can sort of believe it with all of these books being published within a few years of each other, sort of 65 to about 1970. And that's why they, you know, I guess they were predominantly at their peak around that time. The next one is The Phantom of the Temple. This is another later Panther book. So this is just finishing off the last few books that were published in the series. So this is 1969 again. And then the last one in the series is The Fox Magic Murders. Now, this is actually a release of one that came out in hardback in 1968 called Poets and Murder, but it never got released as a paperback, at least initially, under that name. So it came out as The Fox Magic Murders, and that's this Panther one here. So for the sake of completeness, I have included it, even though it's sort of a little bit later than I like to collect paperback-wise. And this one was in 1973, this particular one. And there we go. So that completes these Robert van Guliks. Now, if you do fancy collecting them, they're really not that much money to buy off eBay these days. You can probably pick them up between £3 and £5 each, although a couple of them are quite scarce, and you might struggle a little bit finding nice copies at a reasonable price. But generally speaking, they're around. They're a great read, and I would certainly recommend them. So there you go. I hope you've enjoyed this little look at the Judge D novels. If you do fancy getting these, I have put a link in the description below for you to pick second-hand copies up off eBay. They are pretty cheap now, so shouldn't be too much trouble to get these. Thanks once again for watching. Do hit that subscribe button, and do please give the video a like if you have enjoyed it. And I look forward to seeing you again soon for some more vintage paperbacks. Bye.